sometimes it gets caught up with the,
Static
yeah.
in, static in the room and everything.
All right, I'm going to ask again if you would all take your seats, please. You ready? Good. All right, well, good morning, everybody. I'm Terry Gerton. I'm the president here at the National Academy of Public Administration, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to an event that promises to be very interesting, very closely related to all of the things that you are concerned about, and a great start to the day. I'm personally connected to the topics we're going to discuss today. As a 20-year Army veteran, I remain very interested in the work that happens in the VBA. And also, as an alum of Department of Labor, as a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Veterans Employment and Training, I remain interested and encouraged by what is happening in the Department of Labor. So I know that you are going to find the conversation this morning really intriguing and very motivating. The Academy, of course, has also been involved with both of these agencies over time, and the most recent work that we did was in 2016 with the Veterans Benefit Administration, looking at the claims backlog and making important recommendations that I think are changing how that process works there. Also, of course, related to the topic is the Grand Challenges in Public Administration agenda that the Academy launched last November. In addition to the 12 Grand Challenges themselves, though, underlying that agenda are 6 core management principles that really are the heart of how public administration can deal with those 12 really big conceptual challenges. 3 of them are managing amongst risk and uncertainty, conducting business in an agile manner, and improving service delivery. And so those are the core, I think, of what you're going to hear from our speakers today. And we're really excited to bring this event to you through our standing panel on the executive organization and management. And so with that, I'm going to introduce the chair of the standing panel, John Kamensky, who's going to introduce the rest of the program. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Terry. And welcome, everybody. This is the Executive Organization Management Panel's first meeting of the year, and it's a very different format. Typically, it's a round table, and we just sort of talk informally, but we're a little more formal. We are live casting on, YouTube, or is it, on the Academy's channel. And we have 2 distinguished federal leaders that are committed to maintaining sustained performance in their respective agencies, and they're in very different circumstances. One's a department, and one is at the sub-department or bureau level. Our first presenter will be the Honorable Patrick Bozzella, who's currently the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Labor, and then we'll have the Honorable Paul Lawrence, who's the Undersecretary for Veterans Benefits at the Department of Veterans Affairs. What we'll do is Pat will make some remarks, and then because of his schedule, he won't be able to stay. But then what we're going to do is we're going to move to a fireside chat where Mark Abramson, who is also a member of NAPA and the panel, and I will interview Paul. The Department of Labor, for some context, has about 15,500 employees and 9 major bureaus with a budget of about $40 billion. And they have field offices in every state across the country. In contrast, the Bureau or within the Undersecretary for Veterans Benefits, the Benefits Administration has about 25,000 employees with 8 major lines of business and an operating budget of about $4.4 billion, but benefits and services of about $117.5 billion. So the scale between a bureau level and a department level, so you can see that sometimes, even though it's something like a bureau, it is much larger scale in some cases than maybe a department. In the case of the Department of Education, it's, I think, about 1/3 of the size in terms of employees as the Department of Labor. So there's variations in size and scale, but the tempo between running a department and running a bureau or an administration is different. What's interesting is that both Mr. Pizzella and Dr. Lawrence took office in April of 2018, more than a year into the Trump administration. So they both faced roles where they were taking over for somebody that had been acting in place for a long time. Mr. Pizzella will provide some context-setting remarks describing how the Department of Labor has pioneered several performance management initiatives. And Dr. Lawrence is going to be talking about how he uses a public webcast quarterly performance report on progress and the challenges in each of the 8 major lines of businesses, his way of helping sustain the performance across the administration. We'll open to Q&A from the audience after Dr. Lawrence and Mark and I have talked with him. But because it's being live streamed, we're asking that you fill out little cards that are in your chair and pass it down to a NAPA fellow or employee who will collect them and bring them up, and then Mark and I will use those to ask questions of Paul. For those that are on live stream that want to ask a question, you can email Caitlin Bloom, K-B-L-U-M-E, at napawash.org. That's kbloom@napawash.org, and she will print out and bring us those questions if you would like to do that. So at this point, I would like to introduce Mr. Pizzella. He was, as I mentioned earlier, nominated by President Trump and to serve as the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Labor. And he also, last year, had the opportunity to serve as the acting secretary of the department for several months, from July to September. He has a long and distinguished career as a federal employee in various positions. He was a member of the Federal Labor Relations Authority under President Obama between 2013 and 17. And then President Trump designated him as the acting chairman after President Trump took office of that agency. Prior to that, he was an assistant secretary of labor for administration and management from 2001 to 2009. And in that role, he was also a member of the board of directors of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. Previously, he worked at Preston Gates and Ellis, and he was also, in his earlier career, director of the Office of Administration at the Federal Housing Finance Board, the Deputy Undersecretary for Management of the Department of Education, and he had positions at the Office of Personnel Management, Small Business Administration, and the General Services Administration. So at this point, I'd like to turn the podium over to Deputy Secretary Pizzella. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, greetings, fellow federal workers and anyone else in earshot. Nobel Prize winner Milton Friedman once remarked, if you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, there would be a shortage of sand in 2 years. That is my only government joke for this morning. I'm delighted to be here with you all. I have respect for Napa, how it likes to, I believe, play right down the middle of the road and not sort of tilt one way or the other. At least that's my experience in the long time I've been acquainted with it. And I learned about Napa, ironically, from when I first came to town in the Reagan administration. The deputy administrator of the General Services Administration was a gentleman named Ray Klein. And I worked for the administrator, Mr. Gerald Carmen. And Ray Klein would tutor me, and I listened. And when he retired from GSA, he went to Napa. And so I stayed a little bit in touch with him over the years, but he was one of what I learned about was the sort of respected, dedicated, focused career professionals that truly understand the nature of government and how to change things, if that's what you want to do, is change things. And he was always helpful to me. I've been invited here today to discuss government performance, and I'm going to begin by bragging on our successes at the Department of Labor. But first, I'm sure that most of you are already familiar with the historically low unemployment figures captured by the Department of Labor's Bureau of Statistics that I want to share. At 3.5%, our national unemployment rate is at a 50-year low in this country. For 22 straight months, our unemployment rate has been at or below 4%. The last time that unemployment rate was that low, the New York Jets won the Super Bowl, and the Beatles were still a band. And in a sign of sustained economic growth, there are 1 million more job openings than job seekers today in America. It is truly a unique period of time. These are incredible numbers, and they truly are a sign that our economy is continuing to thrive in today's global marketplace. Now, at the Department of Labor, our agencies are also making a little history of their own. The Mine Safety and Health Administration, known as MSHA, continued its trend for a record low number of miner fatalities in 2019. The Office of Federal Contract Compliance programs obtained a record high $40 million in monetary recoveries in fiscal year 19. In fiscal year 19, the Employment and Training Administration enrolled a record number of new participants in its apprenticeship programs, 241,000. In FY19, the Employment Benefits Security Administration recovered over $2.5 billion for direct payments to plans, participants, and beneficiaries. That's an historical high over the last decade. And in FY19, the Wage and Hour Division recovered a record $322 million in wages owed to workers, the highest number in the 80-year history of the Wage and Hour Division, regardless of who was president, who was in charge of Congress, and they did it with fewer inspectors. These tremendous achievements are the result of the hard work and dedication of our department employees, coupled with a department-wide commitment to using metrics to drive outcomes in our organizations. Our metrics flow from our strategic plan to annual budgets, into 15 DOL agency operating plans, and most importantly, into the standards of every single one of our 14,000 DOL employees. I've also been a believer that if you take care of little things, the bigger tasks won't seem so difficult at a department in an organization the size of the Department of Labor. And I'll give you a few examples. In 2015 and 16, the Department of Labor employees went AWOL for more than 16,000 hours. When we stumbled on that, we began to focus on it. And just last year, we have cut that in half, 8,000 hours, and we're going to cut it again in this coming year. I believe that AWOL employees have a negative impact on both morale and performance because the vast, vast majorities of federal employees show up every day, work hard, focus on the mission, and they know when people aren't showing up. And it's a responsibility of management to demonstrate a commitment to those employees who are working, that we're cognizant of those who are not. In 2019, we issued 125 suspensions and 130 debarments of federal contractors. That's compared to, to a total of suspension and debarments from 2009 to 2016 of just 5. So we're in the contracting business. We sell a lot of goods or acquire a lot of goods and services. But we owe it to the taxpayer and we owe it to our fellow employees to be sure that we're dealing with vendors who are honest and are going to provide a service that the government needs and wants. And when they don't, we suspend and debar. When I became Deputy Secretary in the spring of 2018, the department had 210 open recommendations from OIG audits that were dated from 2016 all the way back to 2011. We focused on that immediately, and we are now down to just 62 open audits that predate 2016. We discovered at the Department of Labor, we were in a department with 14,000 employees, and we had 20,000 position descriptions. Small matter. But when you've got 14,000 employees and 20,000 position descriptions, that's a small signal that something's not right. So we established a digital library for position descriptions, and now we're down to 4,000 position descriptions. Small, but again, taking care of the little things sometimes makes it a lot easier when that difficult challenge confronts you. We've reduced our office space by more than 200,000 square feet since 2016. And one of the things we're very proud of, and Secretary Scalia, in his year-end report to the senior executives, mentioned this in complimenting them, and that is of the 24 CFO Act agencies. Only a Napa audience would know about 24 CFO Act agencies. I don't get to say that anywhere else, but I'm glad to use this here. I can see the looks on your faces. Of the 24 CFO Act agencies, the Department of Labor was one of only 5 to get a clean audit that included not a single material weakness or not a single significant deficiency. That's a tough thing to accomplish. It's not done by any one person, but it's done by the collective efforts of all our employees, paying attention to internal controls, watching spending patterns, et cetera, et cetera. So, after the release of the President's budget request each February, DOL agencies begin drafting operating plans for the following fiscal year, which brings us to performance. Of course, over the course of several months, in negotiations with our Performance Management Center, agencies develop strategies and performance measures that are presented for review in July. The plans are finalized in August and September and are implemented at the start of the new fiscal year in October. That is what we do in order to focus on performance. The performance measures and milestones in the operating plans become guideposts for senior leadership and decision makers, and are used to incentivize staff across the country who are undertaking investigations and processing cases in the field. I really believe it's important that we connect the dots in all these things. Our strategic plan, our operating plan, our budget, if they are in silos, you're going to have confusion out there. By connecting them, it provides the single most important thing I believe is necessary in the leading of a large organization, particularly a government agency, and that is clarity. There is no substitute for clarity if you want to lead a government organization. You cannot blame your employees if you're not giving them clear guidance. So performance management is an important value that we've tried to instill in our leadership and the workforce at the department. We have asked DOL agencies to be aggressive in setting targets, but also transparent in what's working and what's not working. Tying metrics to individual performance plans can be somewhat intimidating for the workforce, and without careful monitoring and planning could lead to agencies setting soft targets. But DOL's Performance Management Center, which is something that I've tried very much to empower, because if you have a strong performance management center, you're going to find out that the agencies are going to be very responsive to the strategic plan and the operating plan and the annual budget. So the Performance Management Center and my staff work with agencies to find the right balance between the ambitious and the realistic, as I like to talk about it in the target setting world. We also hold quarterly check-ins with each agency to monitor success against the operating plan. When we find that current strategies are not meeting targets, or if there has been a shift in resources or strategies, we make course corrections. This performance culture doesn't stop with our individual agencies' missions, but it is also focused on improving DOL's internal management and administration. Again, connecting the dots. We are not going to have a strong, robust performance management culture if we are not an efficient operating organization. When I returned to the Department of Labor in 2018, DOL had 19 different HR offices. We had 4 procurement offices and 4 information technology offices. That sort of patchwork quilt of administrative professionals scattered across the agency is not only costly, but it also led to dozens of different policies and procedures in those respective areas, and it did not provide clarity, which again I get back to the importance of it. Our move toward a shared services model was intentionally slow and deliberate. DOL agencies would be giving up their own administrative offices, and we needed to centralize that in a way that freed up resources for them to focus on mission and ensure that they receive the same, if not better, services under the new model. We spent nearly 18 months in discovery and planning stages to determine how DOL agencies had organized their HR, IT, and procurement functions. This allowed us to identify both challenges and best practices as we designated the future state of a shared services model for each of our administrative areas. From a performance perspective, we found that the vast majority of DOL agencies had not established performance metrics to measure the timeliness or the quality of administrative services. While they were very good at measuring how much money was recovered or how many outreach meetings took place, the quality and the timeliness of administrative services wasn't measured as well. Well, I'm proud to say that we have fully implemented the shared services in the HR and are almost complete in the IT area. And the procurement model will kick off this very quarter. In order to sustain shared services, we have set up governance boards made up of the representatives from client agencies, connecting the dots, having a buy-in involving the federal workforce. These boards emphasize the need for collaboration and shared governance to make sure we are delivering the services our agencies need and constantly improving. And of course, our move to shared services aligns perfectly with the President's management agenda, which includes shared services as a cross-agency priority goal. Again, we're connecting the dots and providing that clarity and guidance to the federal workers who are really responsible for making sure we succeed. I have to say that I'm very impressed with the current PMA as it is focused on something that I think every American can support: efficient government. The first three goals, modernizing IT, using data, and improving the federal workforce, are long overdue and are all areas we can point to into making government work better. So it's been a pleasure to participate today with this organization, and as I used to tease Ray Klein about when he first told me about NAPA, I said, you know, the National Auto Parts Association is not something that really I'm familiar with. And he just smiled and said, you're going to learn. So anyway, I'm very glad to join you. I'll be willing to take questions. I'm sorry I can't stay longer because of scheduling matters to join the panel discussion because I enjoy panel discussions. So with that, I'm available to what's next. I'll defer to John or to the former Deputy Assistant Secretary at VA at DOL, and we just had confirmed our new Assistant Secretary there, John Lowry, a former Marine, Princeton, Harvard graduate. Oh, he went on about 18 months. He's very controversial, but he got confirmed 100 to nothing. Go ahead. So thank you, and I'll take any questions you'd like, John.
Thank you very much, Pat. We had not planned on questions.
That's all right. If you want one or two.
But one question that I did have is that you were a pioneer in the Bush administration on getting to green on the scorecard. And when you did that, that was, you wound up also setting up this performance management center, is it? Could you talk a little bit about setting up this center and how that was done?
Yeah. Yeah, we were very proud at the Department of Labor during the Bush administration. We were the first department to get to green in all 5 categories. And it was a real big team effort. It was a real motivating tool. These agendas, performance management agendas, president's management agendas, they are a management tool. At least that's the way I view them. And they're very useful. And one of the offices we set up there, it's a small office, to focus on these cross-agency issues, these items that come out of OMB that drive management decisions, empowering that little unit and making them the real source and knowledge of all the performance data was very helpful because as for senior management, having that at your fingertips is wonderful. I've said before at various gatherings that Washington I learned this phrase in the 80s. Washington is a town full of data, but not a lot of information. And the key with all the data we have is to turn it into management information. Data on its own is somewhat worthless. But if it's information that a manager can utilize to improve performance, to help design objectives, it's very helpful. So we've used the Performance Management Center like that. We, the gentleman who helped organize it originally is Rick French. He's no longer in the department. And the new gentleman, Denny Johnson, both same model, very data-driven. As a matter of fact, I have the Performance Management Center sit in all our budget discussions with agency heads when we're developing the budget every year. As deputy, I chair that effort, and I always, in addition to the budget center, I want the Performance Management Center in there. So, anything else?
Thank you very much.
Okay, you're very welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Good luck.
What's interesting is that Mr. Prezella set this up in the Bush administration, and this is something that's become part of the ability of the Department of Labor to sustain performance over time, and he's now building on it. And this is a model I don't believe exists in any other agency that I have seen. Now, what I will do now is we'll turn to our fireside chat, but let me give you a little introduction first. Mark Abramson, who's going to be our co-moderator, is the founder and president of the Council for Excellence in Government a number of years ago. And then after that, he became the founder and executive director of the IBM Center for the Business of Government, where I work now. And he oversaw the production of more than 350 research reports and books, and he pioneered this radio show that continues today, where we have weekly interviews of government leaders across the federal government. He's currently president of Leadership Inc. He's still actively involved with improving government, and he is also a NAPA fellow. Now, Dr. Paul Lawrence, who was nominated by President Trump to serve as Undersecretary for Benefits and was confirmed by the Senate in April of 2018. Prior to his confirmation, he served as the vice president at Kaiser Associates, and he has 30 years of experience largely outside of government, but working with federal leaders as a senior management consulting in firms such as Ernst & Young, Accenture, the MITRE Corporation, the IBM Business Consulting Services, and PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is where I first met Paul. He has worked with Mark and others in researching and written extensively on management and government, and is the co-author of 4 books, including Succeeding as a Political Executive, 50 Insights from Experience, What Government Does, How Political Executives Manage, and Paths to Making a Difference, Leading in Government. He was twice selected for the Federal Computer Week as one of the top 100 public service business leaders. And he also, early in his career, served in the U.S. Army at the rank of captain, and he is also a NAPA fellow. At this point, I'd like to invite both Paul and Mark up here to join me. Now it works.
Yeah, looks like it works. Looks like it works.
So we have a few slides that I'd like to do some context setting for how your organization and the Veterans Benefits Administration serves as a leading advocate for service members, veterans, and their families. And survivors. And they provide benefits and services to help service members readjust. As I mentioned earlier, they have like about 25,000 employees. They have 56 field offices and 8 business lines, $4 billion in operating costs, $117 billion in benefits and services. So it's an enormous operation. For the 8 business lines, the focus is around things like compensation, which is the largest area. They have appeals for benefits. They have home loan guarantees, transition economic development, voc rehab, pension, insurance, and then education, which we all know as the GI Bill. When Paul took office, in fact, when he was doing his confirmation hearing, he set 3 priorities that still serve as the anchor for his leadership in the department. Provide veterans with benefits that they've earned, be a strong fiscal steward of taxpayer dollars, and then foster a culture of collaboration. And in everything he does, he keeps on referring back to those as his anchors for what am I doing today, what are we doing around here as an organization. Now, what I thought was very interesting and what was the genesis behind inviting him to come and speak is it's the first time I've seen a senior political leader have a quarterly public live video cast of this is our performance as an organization each quarter. And I saw it for one quarter and I said, well, let's see if that happens. He's now approaching the 6th quarter of doing this, and this is posted up on YouTube and it's alive, and you're going to have your next quarterly meeting or broadcast next week, right?
Thursday at 2.
Okay. So
What channel?
yeah.
On YouTube, on our VVA YouTube channel, yeah.
So what I thought was interesting is that they're about 20 minutes long, and then what they'll do is they'll have something like, here's what the compensation benefits looks like, and then he'll flag, significantly more claims, and then it's the target versus what was actual. Now, it's not just everything is rosy. He'll have things like in the insurance program, at least in the 3rd quarter of last year, there was a problem with one of the areas where it wasn't meeting target. And what he talks about in his quarterly review, he said, this is what we're going to do in the coming quarter to be able to overcome that. Now, what was also interesting is at the end of the fiscal year, they met, each of the 8 business lines met their targets. So for 2020, he says, let's set higher targets. So it's not just can we meet targets, but what can we do better? And he's done a number of things to be able to move this forward. So this is sort of what the summary scorecard looks like at the end of his presentation. And this is the one for fiscal year 19. So, he's honest in laying out everything that's going on. So this is the ability for you to tap into the next quarterly broadcast and also to see some of the additional data. So, Paul, let's get started here.
Okay.
So after arriving at VA, you quickly set up this quarterly review thing, and you've been doing this for more than a year. What drove you to doing this? This is not typical behavior of political appointee of laying out your cards in front of everybody.
Sure. Well, so I had a couple thoughts about stuff before I showed up. And one of them was, it's sort of a nexus of several things. It is perplexing that government leaders talk about transparency and accountability, but it's often very hard to see anybody actually do it. You can look and see there's an annual report written by departments, but they're glossy and the information seems kind of self-selected. I never saw anybody report anything negative, yet things would happen, right? So I always thought if you're going to be transparent and accountable, you should actually be transparent and accountable. The models that I could find, the ones that were the strongest, were what took place in the private sector. The most powerful of which was their annual call, if you're publicly traded, where they report their earnings to the market. And they basically go like this. The CEO and the CFO get on and say, this is what we did. And they go through in some detail, say the expectations were we make so much money, we do sort of thing. They break it down by business lines. It's open to the general public. Shareholders, people who are interested in the company can listen in. It's rather detailed. And then they would have a segment where the analysts who follow the company, so not the general public, but the people who are deeply knowledgeable, ask questions. So I always thought that was a very powerful model, and I imagined some period of time ago that this would be the best model that could be done. And so when I showed up, I said, this is what we're going to do. Right? We have to be transparent and accountable. It is fair to the veterans as well as the taxpayers to figure out what are you doing over there, why, and how am I ever going to find out? So that was the model. Now you're nice to say I quickly did it, but it did take me a while to figure out what was going on at VBA. And ironically, we suffered from too much data, as Pat would say, Mr. Purcell would say, and a lot of information. And I sort of understood this from the VBA journey. You made reference to, back in the day, things were very difficult. It was a paper-based environment, and there was big backlogs of work, and people were frustrated getting their claim. Others before me began to fix all that. And what I realized when I showed up was there were long, extensive meetings once a month for essentially the whole day, where it was all the leaders going through reams and reams of data. And when I individually interviewed the new leaders when I showed up, I asked them about this, and universally it was hated. It was hated, and it was very much so I said, okay, something's amiss here. And so I spent a lot of time figuring out what goes on in each business line that veterans care about. What are really the driving metrics that we really need to focus on? And with that, then, set in motion the webcast. Go and report the information we've done as if you were out there as a veteran, a stakeholder, shareholder, whatever, saying what's going on at the VBA. And this is what we do every quarter. It generally happens about 4 weeks after the end of the quarter, because that's just how it all works.
When I was talking to you at one point about this, you said, oh, but you need to see what happens before the quarterly broadcast. He said you need to sort of dig down and understand what we've set up. So can you?
Sure. So it was really what Mr. Purcell said is like alignment and clarity. Once you know the metrics that are going to be publicly reported, you then can work back. There's a little bit of balanced scorecard, a little bit of logic, a little bit of whatever. So first, pause for a minute. What you have to appreciate about VBA is we are a 21st century factory. Each one of those business lines has metrics around it of delivering benefits to veterans. Everybody who processes claims has performance standards every day. So with underneath this is a tremendous thinking as to what goes on. So if you're processing the GI Bill in Muskogee, Oklahoma, you have numbers you must do every day. Those add up to the offices add up to districts, they add up to nationally. So there's a lot of infrastructure underneath it. So what we did was codify and say, to get to the numbers you just put up there, what must go on every day and every week? Okay? And everybody now focuses on that. And once a week we have a meeting of all the leaders where we look at essentially a spreadsheet, if you will, what they were supposed to do that week, what we did. The meeting started out like this. If you were successful that week, you got a green. If you were within 10%, you got a yellow. And if you were less than 10%, you got a red. So we started out with a big red spreadsheet. We met every week. The meetings were rather direct, which is here's what we need to do. When you fall behind, as you could imagine, we fall behind. You can't make up a day. In fact, ironically, we were the only people that was unhappy in Washington when President Trump gave us the day before Christmas off, because that's a day we lose forever. we counted that out. We multiplied by the number of days. That's how we got here. So we lose a day. So you do that. So it began with then we began to meet weekly. Reds turn to yellow, yellows turn to green. If it's all green, we don't have a meeting. We haven't had a meeting in a long time. So it was easy to, and the other kind of thing was true was what I quickly assessed was that the VBA leadership team, the men and women who run those 8 business lines, and the people on it are really very, very good. And so it was a matter of aligning, empowering, encouraging, talking to them about that. And again, my background is as a consultant in the government, so I'm rather limited by what I know, but I continue to talk about the VBA leadership team as one of the best teams in government. I mean, this is men and women who are accountable every day, every week, as you know. We send a report to Congress about what we've done. Nobody does that. Nobody does that. We do. Every day we know what we need to do. So it's really a pretty powerful environment that instead of fighting and shying away from, oh, geez, I hope they don't find out we're behind, we'll get yelled at or we'll have a hearing, let's embrace it and be proud of being very good for veterans. And the final sort of thing is that last part about the veterans. The mission that goes on in VA is really pretty powerful, right? Abraham Lincoln, to care for him was born in the battle. So you come there with an understanding that this is what we're doing. It's not really we're going to put it off. Many people in VA are veterans. In VBA, it's like 54%. So there's a nexus of real positive energy that can be harnessed and directed and focused, and that's what you see being reported. The other sort of thing, too, is, as you know, this is Washington. Unfortunately, and this is one of my big surprises at the people who are rooting for us to fail at the VA, who are rooting for the anecdote that will define the vision or the message versus the message. So I think it's really important to get the facts out and not tell the story, because that's not advocacy. Right? These are just the facts of what is going on. So when someone says, how long is it going to take to get to my claim, we can tell you on average, because not all claims are equal. But I'd ask you to call up the IRS and ask when will I get my rebate. They will not tell you. I'd ask you to call federal student loan and ask when will this be processed. They will not tell you, but we will tell you.
Paul, how are you?
Good, thanks. Good to see you.
It's good to see you.
Nice of you to come out.
So we were restrained from speaking with sports, but if you have any questions about the Wizards or the Nats, Paul is available after the discussion to talk sports. But to continue on the theme that we're talking about today is John said something important about how you're stopping the targets for FY20. So my impression from our talks when we aren't speaking sports about the office is you're upping the ante for FY20 and you've started a whole agency-wide initiative. Can you tell us
Sure.
about your next evolution of this?
Sure. So what you saw in FY19 was the use of what I just described, right? So we had a good first quarter in FY19, an okay second quarter in FY19, then the beginning of the meetings and the spreadsheets, a very good third quarter, an even better fourth quarter. And so you wake up and say, as we think about what the new year's going to hold, right? And this is what I shared with the leadership team. We've all been together for a year. We're all smarter. We're all better. You can go use the statistics as Mr. Purcell from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. American productivity is going up. What is our commitment to veterans? It shouldn't be the same targets. We can do more. We're in a company, they would expect you to do more. Your targets will go up. Our targets went up. We raised our targets. So these are not OMB-led raise. This is us saying we can do more for veterans. And so that was it. And it's just sort of this evolution of continuous improvement. And we're also in a hard place. If you look at all those businesses that John put up there, each one of them virtually has a private sector analogy. And so veterans are experiencing a world outside of VBA that is moving faster and quicker, right? Gee, I'm frustrated. I can't find my pizza. Go online. It's 3 blocks away. I want my packet. I want it sooner than 2 days. They'll give it to you in 1 day. They'll give it to you in 2 hours. So we're living in that world. So while we're getting better, others are getting better faster, and they're benchmarking against us. So again, if we're going to really honor the commitment of delivering veterans the benefits in a manner that honors their service, we've got to get better. And that's what's behind all that.
And your slogan for 20?
Oh, our slogan for 20 was we also realized there were a lot of headwinds that we had taken care of. We showed up, we had IT problems, we established a great partnership with the CIO and his team. We had some self-induced problems in HR, we fixed those so we could hire. And so basically I challenged the team and I said, listen guys, we're them, you always had the moment, you always imagined the moment, what if? Well now it's what if. So what will hold us back? So we declared that FY20 would be our hashtag best year ever. That everything we would do, we would set out to beat the best we'd ever done before. And what we measure each week outside my office as a board says, the best week we can measure, we can find for this week ever, how did we do? And we compare that. And that's our intention, to be better not only for veterans, to be better for our staff, and to be better for the stakeholders and the folks we engage who also care about veterans.
And it's a hashtag.
Hashtag.
Okay, you got that, guys?
There you go. So it's a hashtag, so you can check it out.
One of the things in the performance measurement world is how do you set targets and how do you know whether the targets that are being reported are correct,
Sure.
so that they're not being gamed?
Yeah. So we've had a lot of history setting targets, so I come well into the conversation. A lot of data, a lot of analysis, and quite frankly, some trial and errors. Set targets too far, too aggressive, too whatever. So there was a lot of history behind that, so it was a matter of not tweaking, but continuing to analyze and the like. So that was kind of continued evolution of a lot of the thought process, a lot of the data analytics and analysis that was going on in VBA. It was very sophisticated data analytics organizations within VBA to do these kind of things. So it was really a matter of sort of adjusting and figuring out the right kind of situation. We have a lot of internal controls that make it very hard for you to cheat, right? You have your personal stuff, you're all measured, right? You're on a computer most of the day, so we can see what you're doing, we can see if you're away, we can see what's going on. Every day you have targets. These targets affect how much you get paid. You really can't, and then you could sort of say, okay, well, you could just go through, start approving claims all day long. We will catch you, and you'll be fired, okay? It just happens that way. Okay, and we have quality people that come and inspect you as part of your performance plan. We will do inspections of your quality, and that will affect it. So we'll catch you there. And finally, God bless them all, because we love them at VA more than life itself. The IG is great, and they're looking and watching all the time too, and they will remind us from time to time of stuff. So it's really pretty hard. Where you see the shenanigans taking place, the highly sophisticated management term, is the allocation of resources in the regional offices, right? So you have 100 people. What do you have them do all day? Well, claims processing, it's called compensation on thing, is the largest bulk of our work. So previously under duress, you'd get everybody to go do the things that were screaming loudest, and you would ignore the other stuff. That's where you see. And so what we're trying to do is explain, no, you have all these targets. Not or, it's and. You have all these targets. So we're working with our management, and they're pretty good at this, so it's not, but you do quickly catch them because, again, or you do quickly observe potentially this, behavior. I wouldn't want to use the word catch.
Now, you set up some incentive initiatives. Could you?
Sure. One of my big surprises when I came to government was how limited I am available to reward people, right? It's just the system we live in, and that's all great and wonderful. But what I observed, the one superpower I do have is time off grants, right? Give you a day off. And so what we did was we started in May of last year with a performance challenge. So we challenged, and I started only one business line, the folks who do the compensation claims. I've been injured in service and do my claim, the ones that tend to get all the attention. We challenged them in an 8-week period to produce 255,000 claims, complete this number of claims. And in 8 weeks, that would be the equivalent of 9 weeks worth of work. Okay, so here's your challenge. And if you do that, you'll get the Friday, if you remember July 4th last year, I think it was like 4th and the 5th. 4th was a Thursday. We'll give you the 5th off. You'll have a 4-day weekend. Okay, and I began to experiment with, would this be an incentive? So one day would get me 4 extra days. That was the thinking, and it's all allowed, right? I'm not doing it. I'm not telling you things. It's all allowed in the thing. And so instead of 255, we got 269,000 claims completed. So it was very much, I said, hey, this really works. Then, so we only did one business unit. So other business units said, well, how about us, right? We'd like to do that too. So I was anticipating this would go well because I sort of had a sense it would go well. I don't know why, other than people said, we've done this once before and it's okay except you get in a lot of trouble. Okay, well, I didn't get in a lot of trouble and we did more for veterans. So we then started what became known as the Columbus Day Challenge. It went from shortly thereafter, like July 8th or so, through the end of the fiscal year. More business units kind of came in, but again, claims is sort of the Cadillac of our business. They were asked to produce in that period of time 402,000 claims. That would be more than they'd ever done in the history of this period of time. They produced 440,000 claims. For that, they got the Friday before the Columbus Day weekend. Remember, it's a Monday, so they got that 4-day weekend. So this time off grant is something I'll continue. I've done it a little bit sparingly around Thanksgiving. Not so much, I think, the New Year and stuff like that. That had mixed results, but I think I'm going to go back to what I call the July 4th and the Columbus Day Challenge and use them as a way to expedite processing. So it was very well received. When I would go out into the offices and do town halls, when are we going to do more of that? That's exciting. It binds them all together. The really innovative offices have sub-challenges. They get pretty excited about it. And so what I realized is, people are competitive. They're very proud of their work. They'll do this. And again, we get a lot of feedback. Make sure you're paying attention to quality. You're not shirking other work. So we monitor that and try to report it to be clear about it. So yeah, I would say the incentives. And even now, as we push towards another goal, a sub-goal, the groups are noticing you can actually do some sort of modest spot bonuses if they'll produce more. So we're really beginning to experiment with that. And again, my view is, look, the goal of all, this is sort of a statement of fact, the goal of all working is to increase our net wealth. Right? That's really why we come to work, right? Now, what you do with it is if you give it to your church, you do something, buy a BMW, that's like okay, right? So we want to find people, say, hey, we want your time at VBA to be rewarding, both professionally and personally, too. So let's find as many of these things we can do that line up to serving veterans.
And Paul, can you talk about your end-of-the-year plans and the all-star team concept you developed?
Sure. Yeah. So the SES, most of the leaders in VBA, we have about 100 SES. They run the offices. They do things at headquarters. And so, if we have our best year ever, what do they get? Well, they're amply rewarded with time off, so I didn't get that, and that's about it. So I said, okay, listen, so it was near baseball season, and the Nationals were eventually going to win the World Series, as we now know, right? But it was like, what will be that? And what I believe the strongest incentive for them is recognition of their peers. So we have 56 offices. So what they'll do is towards the end of the year, we hold conferences in March and September. So September will be near the end of the year. We will recognize the VBA All-Stars. The 56 leaders will vote amongst themselves as to who are the very best, and we'll play on the All-Star theme of having their jersey that says VBA All-Star and whatever. But this is something that, pride in their work, pride in what they do, it really feeds into that. And so it's a very interesting thing to watch it play out. And so far, there is recognition of it and what it all means.
And actually, so that idea really was developed on the way to a baseball game. So the point of that is you can find ideas any place if you look around. So I'm proud of contributing
that's right.
to that concept.
Yeah, but on a serious note, it is really a challenge to figure out how to reward top government leaders, right? We know, and I talk about this all the time, they could make more money elsewhere, and yet they work at VBA. They could go take easier jobs in government, and yet they work at VBA. So, it isn't just enough to say, well, you don't want to be a subject of the hearing. We need to somehow recognize and acknowledge the performance, and that's what we're really trying to do.
Now, there's two kinds of work that you do in terms of, one is sustained performance, and then the other is taking on and fixing things that don't work or something. So in the GI Bill, okay, so
I thought this was going to be a good hearing, a good discussion.
So you have an agency, when you inherited this dynamic enterprise, an agency that resurfaced from years of backlogs in benefit determination, moving from paper to electronic benefits, a major redesign of the benefits appeals process, and then shortly after you took office and you articulated, here's my 3 priorities, you got hit with these congressional hearings and all this stuff around implementing the new GI Bill. So how did you balance the urgent demands of dealing with the problems with the new GI Bill and yet pursue your 3 priorities? So it's kind of like, here's what I want to do, but here's what I'm being driven to focus my attention on.
So there's no magic here. It's just discipline. It was just discipline to kind of do both. And I've gotten a lot of feedback through the confirmation process and the preparation that, again, one of the challenges with VBA is people lose track of the other stuff. Right? And the other stuff is everything but the claims processing. You've got to pay attention to both. So this really set in motion my ability, can I really do this? The GI Bill situation was rather unfortunate but predictable in hindsight, in the sense that in August of 2017, the President signed 2 important pieces of legislation, like the same week. So it was like all-time VBA week, right? He signs appeals modernization, which will set in motion ability of a veteran to appeal virtually any decision at VBA, but their claims is the one you can think about the most. And instead of it taking 3 to 7 years, if you come to the 2 parts that are administered by VBA and do things like, I want someone to check this again, or I have a little more evidence, you can get it done in like 60 days. So this is really big stuff. So that started on, and that was a plan that would ultimately turn out quite well, implemented on time on February 19th of last year. Same week, he signs the Forever GI Bill, with such in motion new ways to administer the way veterans who use the GI Bill are compensated for their housing allowance. Now pause. The original GI Bill, Servicemen's Adjustment Act of 1944, puts in motion the education benefit, as you pointed out. There is a monthly housing allowance described in that law, the 1944 law, Franklin Roosevelt. It is described in 44 words. In the Forever GI Bill, the monthly housing allowance is described in over 4,000 words. It was a little more complex, and it mostly revolved around our ability to build computer systems. Now, I show up in May, I begin to figure out what's going on in June, and you go, wow, this isn't going well. Okay? And you get to go to explain it to a congressional hearing. And when it doesn't go well, a lot of people pay attention. Okay? And so many people pay attention, you make national news. Okay? Especially when just go, this isn't working, and you're being accused of, veterans are losing their homes and whatever. And they're not wrong at this point. Not the losing their homes part, it wasn't quite that bad, but it was really not going well. So you wake up and say, at some point, this will not work on the path we're working. We must do a different path. And you also have this come to realization moment where, guess what? I'm not new anymore. I own this problem. I wasn't here when it started. I didn't do this, but we've got to go fix this. And so you really got to do. So this one became rather personal because of the way it all happened and the criticism that you don't pay attention to anything but the compensation claims. And here, look what happened while this was going on. So all got well. We reset it. We said, we're going back to square zero. We promised on December 1st of 2019 we'll have this all done, and then we'll true you up. Yeah, sure, more hearings, more whatever. And so pause. Frustrating thing is, you should always, wouldn't it be cool to be on national news, right? Until you're on national news and it's not so cool, right? Your mom calls you and says, I'm watching TV, you're on there. And I go, how's it going? She goes, it's not good. This is right? And so later at Thanksgiving, maybe this is like 18, you have this moment in your family where you walk around, so what are you thankful for? And everyone generally says family or something. And when it comes to my mom, she goes, I'll be thankful when you fix the GI Bill. And this is a big embarrassment. Entire country. So fast forward, we spent all of 2019, and on December 1st, a Sunday, we turn it on. It works perfectly, and veterans are now under the new thing. And we promise in the spring, and we'll be announcing a date by which we'll do this. We said early summer, but it'll probably be the spring. We'll true everybody up, so it was like no harm, no foul. And because it's our error, again, who knew I had this power? If we've overpaid you, we will waive your debt. If we underpaid you, we will send you a check. So we fixed all that. But it really was this moment where, and that was, well, I don't know, a lot of every week, but there still was other stuff to be done. And again, aided by good leaders, but they would know that we would pay attention to what they were doing.
Now, there was a similar kind of thing. Last summer, Congress passed what they call the Blue Water Navy Act, and it provides benefits for Vietnam veterans aboard ships off the coast of Vietnam who may have been exposed to Agent Orange. Now, VA was given 6 months to implement this thing, which began, the law says you have to start providing benefits or accepting benefits requests on January 1st of 2020. How did you orchestrate the implementation of something? Government doesn't do things in 6 months that affect hundreds of thousands of people because it's a large-scale system. And getting contracts in place and the code and all this sort of stuff, how did you orchestrate this in a 6-month period, in addition to doing everything else?
Yeah, so we had a little bit of luck, which differentiates the GI Bill story. 2 things. So this is extension of Agent Orange. Bear with me while I do a little inside baseball here. It's what's called a presumptive. This enables you not to have to prove that your conditions are service-related. We spray Agent Orange on the land of Vietnam if you have a certain disease on the land or in the brown waters. We assume that's Agent Orange. You don't have to prove it. You come in and we get you health care and benefits. Okay? But what was always in play was the definition of what is the Republic of Vietnam. It was defined as the land, but not the 12 miles offshore where the Navy was. Ships of the Navy. So this clarified this. Now we had a little bit of a preview because in January of last year there was a court case that said, no, it really was the waters, right? And when that was not appealed, we could see the beginning of this happening. So we started planning, before we really were allowed to, thinking we're probably going to end up getting more debt. So the law was signed by the President June 25th, and it had a feature in that allowed the Secretary to stay the law. You could sort of pause until January 1st, okay? What was frustrating in some of the noise happening, you're not going to process these claims, was, no, this was the law. And when I did a panel with a congressperson who was responsible for this, he said, I know we put it in the law, but I didn't think you'd do that. Well, this allows us to prepare, right? Exactly doing what you said. So we had already been processing Agent Orange claims for the folks on the land and in the brown water, so we knew how to do this. This was complex because of the time frame. We had to be ready on January 1st, no kidding. Finally, these folks in Vietnam, whose average age is now 73, so they're not getting younger, right? And been waiting for this a while. This has been a pretty serious fight going on for some time. So we know we have to be ready. The trick now we had to encounter was, how do we find if you're in the 12 miles? Oh, okay. Well, ship logs from all 1,800 ships that were in commission at this period of time are held over at NAR, the National Archives, right? swell. You're never getting them out of this building, because that's what they say. What? Well, good news, bad news. Again, the difference of the GI Bill, sort of things that could break the right way for you, was they understood this, and come to find out, the archivist of the National is a Blue Water Navy veteran. So he's like, okay, we understand what you need to do. If you take incredibly good care of these records, we will let you take them to a place you can scan them. And then we did this, and we built what's called the ship locator tool. We'll now look and we'll say, okay, USS whatever, we can see where it traveled during the periods of time it was off the shore. Okay? And this is a powerful thing we had to develop, which we didn't have when the law was signed. You can imagine trying to go through ship logs and say whatever. Just so you know, what's a ship log? It's a handwritten piece of paper. This is 1967, right? It's handwritten. And every day at 8 o'clock at noon and at 8 o'clock in the evening, people would come out with their little whatever, not their GPS, and figure out where they were. And this is what we got to compare to what's in the law of where the 12 miles are. So that's what we had to do. We had to train and hire more people. We had to do procedures. We had to get this ready because we knew we had to do it. So yes, we were ready and on time. And what we found out was, to demonstrate the seriousness by which we would undertake this endeavor, is we have an office in Manila. It turns January 1st in Manila on December 31st at 11 o'clock in Washington, D.C. We had the Manila office start approving claims on January 1st, which was like about 12 hours earlier than it would appear. We had people volunteer, not mandatory overtime, volunteer to come in on January 1st in the continental United States to process these claims. So we take this very, very seriously, going to all the VSOs and say, yeah, I know how frustrated you are. I understand. You've been waiting a long time, but we are on this. We estimate we'll receive somewhere between 400 and 500,000 claims for folks who are affected by this. We'll grant many less, but we estimate that's what will happen, and that's what's going on. So we did that on time. You know, we're pretty proud of that.
So what John was talking about was your implementation of the GI Bill, the new GI Bill. So can we link that to the Blue Water Navy Act? So what did you learn in the early days of implementing the GI Bill that you could then transfer to implementing the Blue Water Act?
Sure. Little bit of management stuff, right? We had to build a governance structure, a project team, in such a way that everybody had clear roles. So we called,
On the GI Bill.
On the GI Bill, right. So that was part of the problem, if you can imagine this, right? Then Congressman Beto O'Rourke, well, who's responsible for this, Mr. Lawrence? This is the fall of 18. And the technical answer was, really, I can't say this publicly, nobody, but I would say, well, me and the CIO. So he would then figure out, well, who's in charge? And when I say me, and it was real. So first you have to clarify who's in charge. You got to clarify what the roles of everybody are, and you got to clarify who's all involved. We did that the GI Bill. That was one of the fundamental learnings. And when it came time to do Blue Water Navy, we set in motion the same model. Okay, it was a little more complicated because you had to work across the department. So even though VBA was in charge, you had to work across the department. So we had to teach them how to work with us, and we were some period of time ahead of them. But we used the same models, and it was, you know, I don't want to minimize it because it's hard, but it's fundamental blocking and tackling, which I think large organizations struggle with, right? It's like, who's really in charge of this stuff? Again, you know, VBA, the benefits, it makes it rather clear, and you've just got to sort of get comfortable with that.
And did you get any help from anybody else in government or other agencies, interagency help?
So yes and no. So the folks who were most helpful were the Department of Defense, because we had to go find the ships. They were awesome. They have research of arms. They have things. The archivist they couldn't have been better, right? I mean, we took stuff out. Like, we scanned it. Oops, we ripped some. They didn't get upset, you know? They're helping us find the Coast Guard logs, which are even in worse thing, okay? Come to find out, there were submarines off the coast of Vietnam. Those records are classified, and DOD's helping us get them. So everybody understand. We had really good help. Mostly it was within the department. There were a whole bunch of legal issues by the law. You can appreciate it's never very clear, so you got to make interpretations. There were a whole bunch of things we had to deal with on Congress, and so it was a much more of a cross-enterprise VA thing than across government.
That's really, and in working with the rest of VA, were you sort of like you in charge, or was there a lack of clarity? Because a lot of times in the central office, they think they're in charge when oftentimes it's like yourself that's the stuckey for having to implement something.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're saying these things, not me, okay? So it was clear that this was a benefits-led thing, right? It's providing benefits to whatever, even though the benefits enable you to get health care, but it's the first thing you have to do. So we worked closely with it. The department provided, I guess I would call it general oversight to ensure the right collaboration works together. I think at its very best, the department can see maybe white spaces between where people are touching. So they would meet with us once a month to go through sort of, health check and whatever. But after a while, they could see that things were working together and they were more just checking in, getting information, because you could imagine they'd be getting questions from other places, the White House, the Hill, this would come up. It was kind of a big deal given all the history that's gone on, the interest. As you could imagine, the veteran service organizations who care about this, for the 6 months leading up, were saying things that were inaccurate, and I told them as much, that you're not processing claims, and we said, no, we're processing, please apply. We can't grant till January 1st. Oh, you're going to let people die. No, we're not, but that's the inevitability of life. But there's survivor benefits, right? Oh, people don't have health care. They're all going to whatever. Well, come to find out, there are people in America who could potentially not have health care. If you're of such means, you can only get Medicare Part D, you wouldn't have whatever. We arrange with the hospitals to allow them to exercise their humanitarian access. If you show up, say, I'm a veteran, I need health care now, they will let you in and figure it out later. So we said, no, the answers to all your questions will be there, and by the way, come January 1st, we'll be ready. They were probably right to be skeptical. It's a long journey, our history of perhaps not doing things on time, kind of good. So there's a difficult conversation. The department understood it. They need to be involved too, because people unhappy with me go to the secretary. The secretary needs to know the story and the like as well. And it was a subject of attention. I know the secretary was being asked by the White House, how are you guys doing? So he could do whatever. Went over a couple times to brief folks, so they were aware was what was going to go on. And so there was interest, but it was pretty much our thing. And exactly, the secretary came into a meeting one time and turned to me and said, way to go, this is good, stuff to that. And I said, oh, great big team, kind of whatever. And he goes, well, let's be honest, if it hadn't gone well, you'd still be I got it. So it's all good. So it's one of those things. But it had a little more clarity than just one of those broad missions that everybody could somehow feel that they had a pretty big equities in.
But one of the things you mentioned was your interactions with the veterans groups, and there's a lot of them. How many are there? Do you ever count them? Lots.
No.
Lots.
There's a list like that.
Yeah. My question is, can you plot the evolution of your relationship from the beginning until today? How has it evolved? And you had a lot of things to interact on. We were just talking about the Blue Water.
Sure. Well, one of the things I learned early on, and it's hard to appreciate because you imagine, gee, the confirmation process, if I get this job, what would do? You think about actually doing the business of whatever, and you don't really think about the uniqueness of VA. I believe it is unique, but I don't quite know that the veteran service organizations exist to sort of work with VA in certain points. They help people process claims. They do a lot, and they're very, very important. So I had the very good luck of talking to previous secretaries during the confirmation process, and one of the strongest bits of advice I got was the veteran service organizations are your partners. Use that word. Don't call them stakeholders. Use partners. And he goes, this one person said, if I had it to do over again, my first day I was confirmed, I would get in the car and I would go visit each of them. That's how important they are. And you'll laugh at like the funniness of life, right? The way you become an undersecretary of VA is you actually have to go through a commission. It's an interview process that gets selected, then you get moved to the process. One of the questions posed to me by the 13 people was, gee, on your first day, what will you do? And that was the answer I gave, and I got awesome head nods. So I knew that was what. But so I knew that. So I made special arrangements to meet them, go talk to them. I convene meetings with them once a month in my office. We convene longer meetings where we work details. The other thing I observed, and this is where I was very lucky because I brought several new leaders into the leadership team. They made me more aware of sort of the uniqueness of our lives, which is the veteran service organizations, a lot of them, the ones you would know, VFW, American Legion, go back to like World War I and that period of time and sometime before. But after the conflict, you'd call the 9/11 conflict, right? There are what known as post-9/11 veteran service organizations. They're different, but they're important because they are attracting the new generation of veterans. We at VBA, I don't know why, and I'm not being critical, hadn't spent a lot of time with them, okay? They've been focused on claims, The other guys did claims. It all made sense, I guess. So we began to spend much more time with them to better understand what the next generation of veterans need, want, are doing. So it was a little more than I thought. In fact, if you were to ask me, gee, what's the job really like? The work is hard. Yeah, I got that. I understood that. Gee, but there's this whole thing called the VSOs. You've got to go work with and whatever. So they tricked me into not telling me there was yet another job as underneath this job of paying attention. And by and large, to be honest with you, by and large, the relationship has been very, very good. They've been very helpful. When there's things that I bring them in early, they tell you stuff because they represent millions of veterans who are thinking about certain things. So they're really, really, I find the relationship really valuable.
And are they happier today? Can you tell?
Well,
or is it the job or not to be happy? I mean,
so there's some of that, right? I mean, you have this moment where you say, okay, there are membership organizations. They got to recruit members. The way they do that is represent their members. I would say the meeting we had this week where we explained how Blue Water Navy is going on. They are happy it is going on. They then ask us how many, how fast, when, kind of stuff. So they know that, but I would say they are happy with that. But like everything else, other issues now become, right behind this are, the environmental issues related to war are what's coming, right? The science is expanding, right? So Agent Orange was new. You've heard about the burn pits, right? That we burned everything in the Mideast, right? Exposing folks to that. There are more and more of these questions coming. So it's just an inevitability of how those get dealt with.
Good. One of the projects that Paul and I undertook in the prior administration is we went all over town and we interviewed 63 political appointees. And some of them we interviewed 2 or 3 times. And in fact, Paul, I still go around downtown and I say, Paul and I were in that building. Yeah. So we jobbered on. So my question is, after having talked to these 63 political executives, and it was really at Paul's level, and we wanted to understand what do political appointees do when they come in, and what advice would we give to new political appointees, because we did think that they were quite important as kind of a linchpin of the success of the career civil service. So you really got to get the political appointees right, and a lot of them come in it from outside of government, as all of us, so you know. So my question now is reflecting back. So did you learn things from our interviews that you could apply in the job?
Oh yeah, I listened. So there's several things I think about from time to time. One of them was, and I remember somebody telling this who was not, what I'm about ready to tell you is, you really want to be on the agenda of the administration.
Yeah.
So VA is on the agenda of the administration, right? If you think about the president, it's not a political statement. Military and veterans are at the center of the administration. Our budget is growing. It will continue to grow. Everybody knows it's going to grow. That is a good situation to be in. It's not free of problems, but it's a good situation to be in with focus. It brings resources, and quite frankly, behind it are laws and tools that enables you to do this. So that was really, really helpful to appreciate later. Second was, experience does matter. Now, obviously, I'd never been in government, but I understood the business by being an economist, by working in Washington, what goes on. We process, we do things. I understand this, it helps. When I see others in government now in this team, okay, I see them in positions where they are struggling. They don't have experience. Their life experience before the job is different. And so you think, that's something that I think we figured out, and maybe it's obvious until it's not obvious, right? And the last thing is something we learned from talking to folks is somewhere in between being told what you're going to do when you show up. The president says, go do this, which really doesn't happen, okay? Yeah. And you're on your own. You're left to choose what you should do. So it really made me figure out, okay, like when the GI Bill is scarring, it's like, but this is mine. I got to go figure out what to do. So that led to the 3 priorities of figuring out, okay, at some point, no one's going to exactly tell me what to do. They don't imagine it needs to be self-direct. I would have to go and figure it out. So really figuring out the path was very, very helpful. So yeah, there were many other things from time to time I reflect on in terms of whatever. The most powerful, and I kind of mentioned this already, was how good the civil service really is. you know, and really how valuable the team is. I mean, you know, and what you can expect and what you should be asking, and how you, quite frankly, you can help them.
Yeah.
Now, when you did the book, you were outside government, and you accumulated advice, and you wrote this down. And now that you've been in government and in the hot seat for almost 2 years, do you have different kind of advice that you would give to new leaders?
So it would. I think the advice in the books are a lot about managing within the four walls. Probably the advice I would have is a little bit additional in that sense, right? You don't really get a really good sense for what oversight is until you start to get involved with oversight, right? The activities of Congress and the like. And this is all good, so I'm not pushing back on it, but it is different, right? And it requires energy and time and attention. So that's the third job. The trick was there's three jobs. You got to run VBA, you got to pay attention to the veteran service organizations, and you've got to do oversight really well. Okay, and so that's the trick. The veteran service organization is the group of very active stakeholders, may very well be unique to VA, so I don't know if that, but that's sort of the nexus of what, and the way the third priority came about, the culture of collaboration, was trying to explicitly acknowledge that the veteran service organizations are our partners. It's too frustrating to hear them say, boy, we're here to help you fight with VA. It's like, why is fight the verb? Why isn't it, we're here to advocate, we're here to help veterans, we're here to work together. And it was so disparaging to hear the word fight. And I figured, I have to go and deal with that directly. Again, we don't agree on everything all the time. But the fighting thing really bothered me.
And one of the goals of Big VA is to increase veterans' trust of VA. And I think the target was 90%. It was like 60% at the time they set it. How is what you've done in the VBA, along with the rest of the department, how has that progressed?
So I know our trust scores have gone up for a lot of reasons. The Secretary's made it a priority. There's been a lot of work in the hospitals. I think that's where that happens a lot. I think we've added, but it's not really called out in the measurement, in that what veterans want from us. They want speed and they want certainty. And through the way you've interacted with us, we're delivering more of that. So I like to think it's part of that, but it's not really called out. I guess I would describe it as, you know, man in the street kind of things. When I first go out and talk to people, you know, there was a lot of pent up, I wouldn't say anger, but emotion, energy, passion. Now it seems to be more help, let us help you kind of stuff. So personal touch seems to be better.
But Paul, your outside scores were higher than your inside scores on the engagement scores. How did you respond to those scores, and how did you analyze what was going on, and had you expected to be in that range?
Yeah, so the VBA scores on the annual engagement survey or whatever went down a smidge. I actually didn't pay a lot of attention to that because at some point we run an organization where we spend a lot of time on accountability. People don't like to be accountable. They don't like it when we measure the standards. We have people who don't make the standards. There are no makeup tests. We will end up helping you find other employment. So I understand all that. I worry that for the outliers, I pay attention to the outliers, you know, but we've long since passed the places where we had leaders that were just in the wrong jobs. So I've looked at that, but it's not what I pay a lot of attention to. I'm not ignoring it, but in terms of what we're focusing in on, it's really the delivery of benefits and services. Look, this is a factory. We've got to do stuff every day. I can make it as nice and as attractive as possible, but the vast majority of people enjoy the work. You are not underpaid at VBA. These are serious jobs. This is not claims processing. You have to have knowledge of math. You have to have knowledge of science. You have to understand computers. You are doing stuff in the medical field, the computer field, and the statistical field. These are well-paid jobs. So at some point, you know, veterans have strong demands on us. It is therefore appropriate for us, me as the leader, to have strong demands on our team, and we can't apologize for that.
Okay, good. I think there's some questions
I'd like to open
coming.
up, Caitlin.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, are these from outside the room, and then we've got some
Yep.
from inside the room. And this is good. I can actually read this handwriting. This is great. With the emphasis on the volume of claims processed, how does VBA detect and address any fraudulent claims?
Yeah. This is the most frustrating thing about the job, right? The whole group of people who set their sights on taking advantage of veterans, elderly veterans, you know, scams and the like. The ones who do fraudulent claims are harder to detect, but they're almost self-detected. Someone reports them, or the IG gets them. Those people go to jail. So there's an active, I can't really describe all the details behind it, as you could imagine, but there's an active element of that going on. Unfortunately, we do depend upon trust and honesty, but we inevitably catch these people because there's a series of records you got to produce and the like. So it's one of the things we're paying more and more attention to, and I'm advocating for the penalties to be amongst the most severe when you do this.
Mm-hmm. And a similar related question is you say a little more about VBA's quality controls for claims processing. What prevents people from stamping something approved on every claim to improve the numbers of claims processed?
Yeah, so it's a pretty intricate process, so you're not really able to skip to the bottom and say yes. You've got to do a whole series of things. Generally, we have so many statistics on folks that we know who's really, really good at this, and therefore they're not. We pay a lot of attention to you in your sort of apprenticeship period, the first 0 to 2 years, to make sure the pressure isn't so strong that you want to do that, right? Your production quotas are smaller. Then we have a very active quality team called the quality team that goes and checks. I mean, literally pulls up your claims, go through, gives you feedback on what happened, not the whole claim, the subparts. Hey, you did this well. We have training. And quite frankly, by the time you've gotten to this point, we really want to make you better. There's no incentive to get rid of you when you've learned all these things. So we try to make you better and try not to have that be the problem. So we hope that's not the problem. And again, what we see is, if you look at the distribution of work, there's people way beyond our standards doing wonderful and great. There's folks within like the 10 to 20% off. Sometimes that's explained by a life event, a divorce, I'm frustrated, or whatever. It's the ones who are 50% off we can see. They can't cheat their way to whatever. We just need to help them do something else.
John, to ask Paul, so related to that question about claims, and I like the way you were describing it. So no panel today is incomplete without asking a question on artificial intelligence.
Right.
How far away are you, is the department and in government in general? Because claims is something that would seem intuitively that artificial intelligence could help you with.
So we have our first contract underway to bring artificial intelligence to VBA. Okay, the challenge, so I know the department has, and I'm not going to do this well because I'm not steeped in their lore, a National Artificial Intelligence Institute. So everyone gets that, okay? But I think it's like the thing to say, we're all into artificial intelligence until you actually have to go do it. I always thought the work at VBA must be easy, and we're just one Lean Six Sigma problem away from fixing everything. And if I get there, that's what we're going to do. The claims process is really hard and complicated, and we can't talk our way out of that. Between a series of laws and court cases and things and exceptions and offsets and DOD regulations and whatever. So we're not forever away. But you need to start, and we need to train folks who do artificial intelligence on how unique our environment it is. But one day it will be there. It's just going to be a slow slog. We're not going to be able to just pop it in and make it work, but we're going to start. But we figured it out because we have a finite number of folks. There's lots of work to do. The more we can offset with other things.
So, but would you predict the number of employees in VBA to go down in the next 10 years? Or is that unrealistic?
So let's talk about the Paul Lawrence tenure. Okay.
Yep.
Because who knows? Look, I can't promise like whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
What I promised when I showed
Speculate.
up. What I promised when I showed up, and I was very clear about this, and I'll repeat it. Here's what I said. I promised when I showed up, the number of employees the day I leave will be greater than or equal to the number of employees when I show up. There is so much work to do going on. The backlog is low, the famous over 100, but there's inventory of things and the expectations are rising. There's much more, and I said I would not spend any time thinking about closing offices because that's just the greatest fight with Congress in the history of the world, right? We would not do that because that would distract from pain. So that's our intention. And quite frankly, if we had all the artificial intelligence we would still need those number of people to deal with the hard decisions about what does it all really mean, and we grant, what do these folks really need, and the like. So that would be it. Now, I do think artificial intelligence will be a great help, but I'm not going to lie. We started talking about shared servers 15 years ago. Last I heard, Pat's still working it through, okay? Artificial intelligence, we're probably going to have the same journey, okay?
Well, a similar question that was raised, which is, What would the impact of the 400 to 500,000 Blue Water Navy claims have on initial claims processing targets? Did you plan for how the targets are set and then dumping all these additional claims into the system?
Yeah, so that's what we spent all 2019 thinking about, right? Which is what happens when they all come. So it was a pretty easy conversation. We modeled it out, said if we do this, we will need more. So we went forward with the request, we worked with Congress, said we will need more money. So we got more money. And the way I explained it is this. Guys, think about when so you sort of, people want to talk about the backlog claims and kind of whatever. Said, think about the following situation. You show up at Safeway and there's one person checking out. Okay? 6 people are now in line. That's what VBA will look like if you don't give us more. Okay? And if you don't give us more, let me remind you of what went on between 2011 and 2013 when there were more exposures and more things and more. Everybody waits. So here's the question. Everybody can wait, or we can process how much money do we want to devote to this. And so we got more money. So we explained it very carefully and said, listen, it's just a math problem, so how much service do we want to give to those veterans? We can't perform miracles on those kind of numbers.
Okay. And another question is, given the focus of this discussion is around sustained performance improvements, what are your thoughts on driving change in organizational culture that encourage continuous improvement and not just check the box to meet a target and make it look good without ensuring quality?
So sure. So actually, it's kind of ironic. We're having a conference in March, and so part of what we'll do is talk about that. What I'm going to talk about is sustained acceleration, not sustained performance, but sustained continuing to think about being better. And it's the culture part is sort of this, the phraseology is weird, dissatisfaction with standing still. We've got to continue to be thinking, and so it's really not so hard. A lot of the leaders, so for example, I convene once a month what's called the Directors Advisory Council. These are 10 of the 56 leaders who come in. And basically, they have a wealth of good ideas. And not just like, Internet to Mars kind of rocket science stuff. No, it's like, stop doing these things. Stop requiring these things. Stop doing this. These are no longer needed. They're taking our time to do things that are just overcome by events. So there's a wealth of good suggestions in these leaders and these employees. So to me, it's more prioritizing and figuring out what we can get done, but letting them know this is all possible. And quite frankly, there's a sense of, and again, you talked about people were acting. They were acting in VBA for 3 years. So there was a sense of, well, why do anything? Someone's coming, kind of whatever. Now we're here, and they see what's possible. People understand, and they want to be good and better. So will it end when I go? I don't know. But while I'm here, this is what we're going to work on, and guess what? The targets will go up again next year. Okay, we'll just keep working on this, and people are getting better. Here's my anecdote. When I showed up, I get this report every morning. Okay. And it would say a whole bunch of information about the claims being processed that night, how old they were, what was going on. A good day was when we would complete, so this would be the final part of the process, complete 5,200 claims. Last night we completed 7,000 claims. Okay? I actually think we can still do more. Okay? So this team is really focused on that, and they get it, and they're proud and excited. And look, we want to serve veterans. We don't like it when they say, I'm waiting. You did this wrong. We don't like it either.
Yeah. Paul, what I'm happy about is I don't detect any frustration in your discussion, because one of the things when Paul and I interviewed people, we found a lot of people who were frustrated with the system, the rules and regulations, preventing them from doing the stuff you're doing. So do you have a sense, are there things preventing you, regulations, whatever you want to call it, the bureaucracy, preventing you from doing better, or do you have it pretty much where you need it to be, and those kind of complaints are kind of overdone?
Yeah.
What's been your experience?
So it's hard to generalize, right? So, our budget is, we didn't get all that we asked, but we got a lot of what we asked. So you can't really say we didn't get enough money, okay? We could have got more, but that's just life,
Right.
okay?
Right.
So that's pretty good. The rules, the laws and the rules are changing, so that's really good. So for
getting
example,
better,
if
yeah.
you see the president talk and he runs around, he says, I signed the Accountability Act, so he can say, you're fired at VA. We're the only place where you can do that. So the fact that we can deal with employees, and I don't mean bad employees, I mean habitually bad employees, right, who should not be around. That sets in motion a sense that we're not powerless. In addition, I think this administration is really focused on dealing with the union and making sure we understand we serve veterans, not the union, and so VA is at the cusp of dealing with that and trying to get people focused on that. So we have a little more management tools that make a lot of it within the. And the other thing, Mark, is one of the good things about being old is you begin to realize what you can't change, and you sort of stop saying, "This is the rule. Like I got it. This is the rule. I got
so
it.
that's
Let's figure out how to work our way around it."
Yeah, so do you have any special authorities for hiring? Because when you said you have these...
So yeah, I've been asking since forever, but apparently the best. No, we don't. So we don't. I found out about this that we apparently back in the day, so pre us, we had them, but they were misused and they were taken away. So it is one of those things.
So when you need to do a sergeant hiring, you have to go through the same process.
We go through the process. That's right. We have
know.
veterans preference, which is important. We understand, but at the same time, there's lots of other people out there, so we understand all that. So no, it's just working within the system. So it's doable, but I understand in a different world with different sets of constraints. But again, I would characterize myself as an informed consumer. Like I knew what this was going to be about, right? I got to go and explain to this interview process what I would do and how I would think about it, right? So I actually had to think through all these things, right? So it was a little bit different than, hey, congratulations, you got this job, and you have all this big discovery moment. I had discovery moments, but it was understood, right? And the difficult history they had gone through was all played out in the public, so you could read about it and understand, what's what.
Yeah. Another question. They're interested in your thoughts on avoiding organizational fatigue because of too much of a focus on KPIs and your focus on acceleration, et cetera.
Yeah, I think about that a lot, and I don't know like how to. Here's how I've dealt with it. I think you'd have too many KPIs, so we try to really knock that down, right, so that we don't do that. But the other thing is I'm not apologetic for the pace we're under. Again, bear with me, John, because I know you're not a veteran, but the military culture is one of such that people understand what we got to do. You can't really say, sorry, veterans, we don't want to do that. It's really powerful. So there's a phrase we have, right? It doesn't get easier, we get stronger. That's what I think about, guys. We can do more. We're really good at this. We can do more, okay? It's not 30 times more, but we can do more. And which veteran are you going to say no to? Like, that's the problem we have, right? So, yeah, I worry about the fatigue thing. I got it. I don't see it. As you know, John, the government is very generous in leave. The government is very generous in its work rules, right? We just gave 12 more weeks to folks who have kids. Like, we're very, very generous with time off, okay? So I got it, but it's why we pay you. It's called work. And, the same thing for me, My big surprise was when I showed up for this job, I thought the political appointee salary was what's written in the book. It's been frozen at 2011.
Gee, we forgot to include that, Paul.
Yeah, no. So I was like, oh, you didn't tell me about that. So there's surprises for everything. But,
we've got to include that.
Have open eyes about what we're doing. Again, that's why the model of what goes on at VBA is so important to understand. It is a factory. The models we talk to about what should be better, it's Toyota. Right? This is who we talk to about how do you improve your work, right? We then look around and say, how do companies like USAA do their work, right? That's the models, and so it's a somewhat different government agency.
Another question in relation to sustained performance focus on performance improvement. Are there things that you're doing that you would like to see other agencies do, or something to put into practice that would extend this beyond just you and what you're doing to put it into some sort of regular process or something?
I don't know. That's a hard one. I mean, don't forget. I mean, the work Mark and I have done, and I know you've done some too, John. And this is like, what are these agencies? They're all different sort of things, right? So some agencies don't do the work we kind of do, where every day you have to deliver service. In many ways, we're much more like a state agency, right? We have to deliver services to the constituency. IRS is a good example, but other federal agencies often aren't, right? USDA doesn't deliver food stamps, right? I mean, it's done by the states. So you have to kind of subset it. I mean, I guess the one thing I would continue to encourage folks to think about, the thing we began at the very beginning, transparency and accountability. What does that really mean? You don't have to do a webcast if you're uncomfortable. I mean, I got it. It's kind of a humbling event to read a teleprompter in public in front of, literally tens of thousands of people. I got it. But I think we should figure out how we actually report on what we're doing, because I do think, and this kind of ties into some of the NAPA charges, like, what's the disconnect between trust and government? Like, well, do I understand what's going on? I can't speak broadly, but we can speak particularly about, hey, I'm going to explain everything we're doing, to include the foot faults, to include the embarrassing moments, and then we're going to tell you how we're going to go about dealing with it, to include me personally going and dealing with it. So, and that's kind of something I would encourage folks to think about. Everything is unique, everything, I mean, you know this from raising kids. You ask them to do something they don't want to do, they're not doing it. So I'm not going to give you some advice on that, but I'd ask people to think about, what does it really mean to actually go and do these jobs and deliver on the promises to folks who need your help.
Mark?
Well, no, I was just going to follow up on John's question about kind of exchange of information to other agencies which are similar. I take it from your answer that there's still not very much exchange of knowledge, and it's why we're here today. John and I thought Paul really had a best practice and a new practice with all the charts, but it's still very frustrating for me as an outsider to look at government and see the lack of number of agencies coming to you asking you about this, and the lack of a number of vehicles for your agency to spread their experience for good experiences and bad experience. Is that kind of overstatement? Am I being unduly negative?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I don't know broadly about the whole cross-government stuff. I don't spend a lot of time with that. The deputy secretary goes to the president management council and the like, and so I don't know enough about that. I just do know that everybody's very, very busy. So it's not like, hey, I have some spare time. So be honest with you. Now go back to the priorities. Someone calls me up and says, hey, I want you to go speak somewhere. I want you to. This is what I say to myself. Does it help me do those 3 priorities? Okay, today I rounded up on number 1 because I thought I'd learned something from Pat, and I did. Okay. But basically, I often say no to people because I can't, because this is what I got to spend the hour on. So I understand all that. But listen, I don't mean to be uncharitable, but this is on YouTube. You can see this and figure this out yourself. I would hardly call it. If innovation is technically something new, then this is innovation. But is it really magic? No. It's just the hard work of taking your mission really seriously and going and doing it. There's a lot of that going on in VA right now under the Secretary's leadership and the like. I'm assuming it's going on elsewhere too. They just do it in a different way, maybe.
Well, last question that we'll use to wrap up here. And I think you referenced this a bit, but do you have the ability to do pay for performance? You were talking about incentives.
Yeah, I haven't really explored that. I would like to think about it. I know some of the models I had in mind when I thought about the job, especially dealing with the union, was some of the things I had read about over at patent and trademark organizations, or if I understood it, the examiners got more if they did more. I was not, and I thought to myself that I would spend some time thinking about that if I was not able to motivate the employees with other ways. However, the use of the tool, the use of the challenges proved it, easier. Okay, as well as our perspective on dealing with the union now. It's a little bit different than when I went through the confirmation process, so that's enabled something, as well as, quite frankly, the Accountability Act. So I don't feel the need to do that. I would be interested in doing that because, as you can imagine, this is something I think about all the time. It's too easy in any organization, I'm sure this is true in yours, to spend time thinking about the bad performers at the expense of the good performers, right? The really good performers who really move the needle. And then when they leave, they go, well, nobody paid attention to me. So I wish there were ways to really acknowledge it. Marginally, you can in our pay system, the way it works. They get better bonuses, but again, compared to what might be more appropriate, it is something I haven't forgotten.
Okay. Well, we're drawing close to the end of our time. We had several other questions that were posed, but I'm going to skip those for now and just go to you and ask a general wrap-up. Do you have any final thoughts on the state of VA and VBA and what's on the horizon?
Yeah, I guess I'd probably flip it a little bit and make a request of the audience, which is we're struggling, and I'd ask your help us change the narrative. I describe VA as the Rodney Dangerfield of the federal cabinet, which is everybody makes fun of us and we get no respect. And at some level, it's kind of funny, and you go, okay, well, we've all had teenagers, I got it, that's kind of life. But a steady cadence of this kind of noise leads to distrust. And when the veterans don't trust VA, they don't come in. And I don't want to jump to suicides, but 2/3 of them don't come to VA. So we really need to get the message out about what's going on, that at VA, tremendous things are taking place. We run the largest integrated healthcare system in the United States, right? 160,000 people will come to appointments today. Your doctor was very likely trained at the VA. This is why we'll never privatize the hospitals, because they train all the doctors in our country. You can do the math. We have a very small budget. We administer $100 billion. You can see it's pennies on the dollars. And the hospital and the cemeteries test out on the American customer satisfaction higher than anybody in the private sector. But you don't have to take my word for it. AMA does studies of the wait times. Dartmouth does studies of the quality of care. Partnership for Public Service has finally put us on the list, right? We're on the list as opposed to never being on the it's a better place to be. So, you know, when people do that and they give you the snarky kind of eye roll and say, oh yeah, VA, and they roll, I'd ask you to help me. I'd ask you to turn to them and say, please stop that. It's just not true. And say something like this: America honors its veterans, and by any measure, VA provides world-class service. And you'll do that, I think you'll help to change the narrative. That's really, really important. So thank you very much for letting me close with that.
We really
Thank you.
appreciate it very much. I want to thank you and Pat for taking time out of your busy schedules to come and talk to us. Next month's agenda of the standing panel is Dustin Brown, who is the ranking civil servant on management issues in the Office of Management and Budget, and he's going to talk about the 2021 management priorities that will be announced in the President's budget in early February, and that meeting will be on February the 28th. Again, thank you very much for coming. Yeah, and then you can go. So.